Everyone at one time or another has contemplated this comment of Jesus is be therefore as a little child, for such is the kingdom of heaven. And it isn't so easy to understand it. We've all thought about it from many different angles. I was reflecting, what is it that keeps us from having the attitude of a child? Well, of course, there's many qualities within us, but also what we're dealing with is how do we perceive the world around us? How do we perceive the kingdom of God? And even more clearly, how do we think about God? Because what we're talking is about entering into the presence of God with the attitude of a child. And what's going to determine how we do that is where we think we're going and how that feels to us. One of the many things that Master brought to the West was the idea of God as Divine Mother. And when you read Autobiography of a Yogi, which many of us have read many times, there's many different sentences in it that will hit you at different times. And one of the things at the beginning of the book that's very dear is Master talks about his own relationship with his birth mother and how close their connection was, both as mother and son and also spiritually speaking. It's very interesting. A woman, a friend of mine, was pregnant and she had a son in her womb. And during that time, she developed a great deal of friction with her husband. And Swami Kriyananda was anxious to help support their marriage. And he said that in the Vedas, it says that the closest human relationship is between a mother and a son. And very often, and it says in the Vedas, when a woman is pregnant with a male child, that child will push the father away out of jealous possession of the mother. And it may not even be the mother's own thoughts, but it's the son influencing her to have her all to himself. Isn't it? It's very interesting. So many subtle things go on that we don't know anything about. But here we have Master's story about his devotion, just interestingly. So the whole idea of telling women or that you'll be very blessed to have sons, the women's movement tends to think of it as an anti-female gesture, but in fact it could be responding from a much deeper level, just wanting for a woman to have that closest of all possible connections. We should be not so quick to judge things that we don't always understand. Now, going back to this, Master tells the story of his own devotion to his mother and how they would worship together and how she took care of him in so many ways, which culminates in the story of her death and how he had a premonition of her death. He tried to persuade his father to go to the city where she was, Calcutta, telling his father that mother is about to die. The father, being more rational, he refused to respond. Yogananda became enraged as a little boy and said, "I'll never forgive you, you'll see." And in fact, the mother died before they could get to Calcutta. And Master talks about how every morning after her death, he would make a pious pilgrimage to this tree where he had a shrine, and how pathetically his little heart grieved. And he even says, "It was years before I reconciled with God for him taking away my mother." I mean, it's just a one line in the Autobiography of a Yogi, but think about that. Here he is, he's an avatar, he's a fully realized being, he's living a fully human experience though. He's incarnated and taken on limitation and pain and death, which is what happens in the human condition. And it was years before he was reconciled to the fact that his mother had left him at such a young age. I mean, we're talking about a tenderness of heart and a commitment of our energy, not merely in an abstract way to the divine, but to every living creature and every relationship that we have, whether it's a mother and a son and a mother and a daughter, a husband and a wife, sister to sister, friend to friend. The Master committed himself so completely that it was years before he was reconciled. Now, we're beginning Suffer little children to come unto me. Master's giving of his heart to his mother was not a calculated gesture. It wasn't an analysis of, well, she's a good mother for these reasons and she's helping me in these ways. The 10 Commandments say to honor thy father and thy mother, so I will. Nothing like that. It was just uncalculated, pure expression of his capacity to love. He had an unlimited capacity to love, and when the opportunity was there, he simply gave it. And he paid the price. I was unreconciled for years. You see, intellect calculates. This is what our reading is saying today. It calculates profit and loss, jeopardy, capitalization, optimization of every aspect. Child doesn't even know how to think like that. Child just gives, opens and loves, because it is the nature of the child to do so, and the child has the expectation of it being welcomed. Sometimes, given human condition, that expectation is disappointed, but nonetheless it's in the nature of the child to do so. I've often commented about my friend when the baby was minutes old, reaching up to hold the hand of her father. That wasn't anything that she was thinking of. It was the face of love looking back at her, the karmic relationship that she had chosen, and her absolutely unthinking response at the age of 2 minutes to just take that hand and hold on to it like this. There's an amazing photograph that you can find somewhere on the internet of a surgeon who did a surgery, I think for the spinal separation that happens, in utero for a child that was about 6 months old, maybe 7, and they anesthetized the mother and they cut open her womb, and he operated on the fetus, and then they put him back together, and in fact the child was born with his spine intact. And there's an actual photograph at a certain point where this tiny little hand, it's in the operating room, all the cloths are laid like that, this tiny little hand reaches out of the mother's bulging stomach and takes a hold of the surgeon's hand. And because it was an historical surgery, it was being documented, and there was a photographer who got the picture. As it's told, the surgeon himself, either in the moment or later, just burst into tears. Completely unexpected, but the child knew that someone was helping him and reached out. Now, when Master talks about Divine Mother, and when he talks about God, he talks about how he worshiped God as Divine Mother. You have images from India of different forms of Divine Mother, Durga, Kali, Saraswati, and when one gets first interested in these teachings, you sort of get very interested in these symbols, and they're actually quite profound. Again, it's like we shouldn't judge what we don't know. There's many deep and superconscious reasons for the way all those stories are told. It's not intellectual. It's an effort to convey in ways that we can grasp, in a certain sense, by bypassing the intellect with superconscious symbols. We have around the church here these various symbols that are held up. We have the cross, and people associate that with Jesus. But it's not really, it was a symbol, it was a divine symbol long before it was, before Jesus was crucified. It's upward moving and contradictory energy. It's the fact that all of our life is often a struggle, that one thing crosses out another. And just that mere picture of that cross just presents to our mind something that we intuitively grasp. The Jewish star, the triangle pointing up and the triangle pointing down. 3 chakras moving up, 3 chakras moving down. Even the swastika, which was destroyed in modern times by the backward version of it that Hitler used to represent his backward philosophy. But the forward side of that is the whirling energy of the chakras. And you find it all over Hindu temples, and when you first see it, it's startling if you're only schooled in Western history. But it was a symbol of the moving energy because there's something in it that you can see. The symbol of Ananda, the joy symbol, is something that Swami saw. He didn't artistically draw it, he saw it. And it felt like the soaring energy and the descent of grace. He said he drew it about 70 times before he got it just right. So Mother Kali, Durga on her tiger, Saraswati playing her instruments, these are qualities of the feminine aspect of the divine. Kali is also fierce. She's not only kind, because there's nothing more fierce than mother love, really. Mothers will sacrifice themselves without hesitation to save their children. So Master, when he talked about God, he talked about mother. And when he came to the West, he brought that image of mother. He wanted us to find a way to be very, very intimate with God. I mean, intimacy is the opposite of separation, isn't it? And so many people in their lives, they talk about the desire for intimacy, and physical intimacy is a very small part of it. What they really mean is to take down the barriers that we all keep erected between ourselves and the people around us. Why do we do that? We do that because we don't trust. We don't trust other people to be what we want them to be. We don't trust ourselves to really commit in that way. We don't trust that if we are seen, that we will still be loved. We have so many reasons, and yet all of this in us pulls in that direction. You know, just like the little baby reaching out of the womb, the 2-minute-old daughter reaching up for the hand of her father, there's that in us which wishes to expand and to embrace. And all of it is about the inward longing of our spirit, which has been separated from our true nature, and the desire to merge back into it. You know, we feel incomplete, as I talked about this recently. We feel incomplete, and everything is about that longing for completion. Whether it's human love, whether it's giving birth to children, artistic creation, and above all, in our relationship to God. But why are we held separate? Well, for many, many decades, centuries, millennia, in recent times, through Kali Yuga, keeping God separate was part of how everyone was thinking. You go to Europe and you see the whole Christian culture, and how big can the cathedral be? How high can it be? How long can it be? And there was competition among different cities, and you go into certain cathedrals, and then you'll see marks where the city of Florence, their cathedral is only this big, and the city of Rome, theirs is only this big, and ours is this big. And then you'll see it also up the walls. It becomes bigger, but where is the intimacy in that? You walk into it and it's the opposite of intimate. We're meant to feel, small and cowed and obedient and fearful. But that's not what the heart longs for. And true mystics, Jesus himself and all true teachers, tell us that in the end, what really happens to us is mystical union. And here Jesus is telling us we have that union by becoming like a little child. So if we're going to be a little child, we have to create a relationship with God that allows that part of us to come out. And Master felt that the time was right. The yuga is changing. And this intimate approach to the divine has always been there. But it's been more hidden among the mystics, and now it can be brought out. Saint Joseph of Cupertino, an beautiful Italian saint who had the inconvenient habit of levitating. And the Catholic tradition is to persecute them when they're alive because they're very inconvenient, and then canonize them after they're passed. So Saint Joseph was imprisoned, as they call it, but not imprisoned in a jail, but imprisoned in his own cell. And he was imprisoned in a room in the basement section of the Cathedral of St. Francis in Assisi. And for many years he was more or less kept confined to quarters, because then whatever was going on wasn't so confusing for everyone else. But he was devoted to the baby Jesus. And in his cell there's a little doll that, in the privacy of his own cell, that was his relationship with Jesus, was with the baby Jesus. Now think about pure, spontaneous, uninhibited intimacy. And what could be more so than between a parent and a child? My friend, before his son was born, being a rather dignified individual, swore that he would never behave like all the parents he'd seen around him. He said it was only a matter of days. He said, you'd do anything to get a smile out of that child. All sense of your own position completely dissolved in your kitschy coo like this. He said it all goes out the window. So when you go into that room where Joseph of Cupertino lived, as some of our friends did who recently went to Italy, and you're standing there in this place and you see this baby, and of course, God comes to us in whatever way we long for him. And so that baby was a living thing. And still sitting here all these years later, you can tell, this is the living presence of the baby Jesus. And the picture goes in your mind of this man for how many years living in solitude. And what freedom of heart that must have given him. Just think of how he could express himself, knowing that there was no one present but himself and God. Now, that's what Jesus is talking about when he's saying, be ye therefore as a little child, with no inhibition. Why not? Because if we can love God in a way that allows us to do that. So Master brought to us this inward reality. This is the time for inner communion, the time for knowing God has come, is how he put it. But if we're really going to commune with God, who is he or who is she? And it's not, please, about women and men. And it's not that patriarchy is bad and matriarchy is good. Ignorance, as Master said, is pretty much 50-50. Women are as ignorant as men, and men are as ignorant as women. We're just two sides of the same coin. We're just ignorant in different ways. And at different times in civilization, one or the other ignorance prevails. But you're a woman this time and a man the next time, and believe me, it just doesn't pay to get too invested in any of that. But what we're talking about is unconditional love. We're talking about approachability. We're talking about forgiveness, and we're talking about compassion. That's what Master wanted us to understand in talking to us about God. When we hurt, when we grieve, when we fail, when we feel beyond embarrassed, mortified, almost unable to go on because of the realization of our disappointment, our own failings, whatever it might be, what do we long for above all? What is the word? Comfort. Jesus referred to it, not directly. After I am gone, I will send you the Comforter. Master interprets that. The Comforter is the feminine aspect of God. You don't have to call it Kali. You don't have to call it Mother. It doesn't really make any difference what you call it. It's the fact that I can fearlessly open myself in this way because God will comfort me. And when we have that underlying attitude, you see, it changes everything. A number of years ago, there was a woman, an old friend of Swami Kriyananda, who he saw occasionally, and she had a daughter, and the daughter was very intuitive. And the daughter bought for Swamiji this little statue And the statue was of a little boy praying like this on his knees. And it was about the dorkiest little statue that you've ever seen. There was very little of actual art to it. And Swamiji, who has such a refined sense of aesthetics and is not sentimental on any level, when I saw it, my first impulse was to be a little condescending toward it. Swami was not at all. And he said, made a comment about this woman's intuition and holding this little boy child praying. He said, "This is how I always think of myself." Now, who thinks of Swami as a sentimental statue of a little boy praying? You think of him so differently than that. But he said, "This is how I always think of myself." And he was very touched that she was able to find that and then offer it to him. And I was looking in his house. I don't know whatever has become of it. And I'm not sure that how often he said that, and who knew. It might have just been considered something that wouldn't have been in his taste, or maybe it's preserved somewhere, I don't know. I was searching in his house recently, but everybody's been through it. Just where is that statue? It's how I always think about myself. And even Master, when people would ask him, we look at him as so powerful. And of course he was so powerful. But what we don't hear as often as we need to hear, even though Swami tells us we don't hear it, Master was always referring everything back to God. They're not my disciples, they're God's disciples. Why do we do it this way? It's the will of Babaji that we do it this way. This is what my Master wanted of me. Now, what we have to understand is to be like a little child doesn't mean to be weak. And this is the difference between actually being childish and being actually childlike. Because at the same time, children are the way they are because they haven't had enough life experience yet to be different. And sometimes that life experience begins very early. And I remember a friend of mine who, at the age of 10, she knew nothing about reincarnation or the spiritual path. It was many years before she found it. But she was 10. She said to herself, with more wisdom than she knew, being a child is not as good as people think it is. And then she said to herself, don't forget this. Because just being a child is just to be helpless, somewhat uninformed, and completely at the mercy of everybody else's point of view. I saw this mother carrying her baby like this the other day. And the poor little baby, its little hands are down, its little feet are down. It has no choice. It's kind of flailing a little bit. But the mother's just carrying it like a sack of potatoes. And you see babies in the little chest things. What choice do they have? Their poor little faces are smashed and they're just in like this. And they don't even know really where their bodies are at that point. So it's not quite the same as if we were caught like that. But just the sheer helpless indignity of it is there. I remember watching a little very advanced, very expanded consciousness child at the age of 2 having his diaper changed. And maybe I was projecting this, but I don't think so. I walked in and his mother was changing his diaper on the bed in our house, and he had his head pulled up and back and over, and just staring off like you do if you're at the doctor's office. It's like this isn't really happening. Just the sheer indignity of it was just totally overwhelming to him. So children, there's a lot that isn't good about it. And there's a lot also that's extremely naive. It's kind of a joke how children, I'm going to be a movie star, I'm going to be a basketball player, I'm going to be a millionaire, I'm going to have a car like that, whatever it might be. And we just kind of pat them on the head because we know that the actual realities of life are just going to beat the heck out of all of those ideas, aren't they? Right. So we don't admire that. But then you have someone like Swami Kriyananda, who had power beyond imagination of expectancy, accomplishment, everything. And he says, oh, I always think of myself as just a little boy at the feet of Divine Mother. Now what that really is, you see, is that's absolute fearlessness. What have I got to protect? What do I care? How can you be like that unless you are in direct relationship to the all-comforting, all-compassionate, all-forgiving, ever-loving presence of God? That is the only possible way to strip away all of those fears and self-protectiveness and this and that. Absolute openness. In Swami's book, Sadhu Beware, it's a very interesting little book. He basically lays out how to live a life truly surrendered to God. That book is not for sissies, really. It's a tough book. It's short, it's right to the point. Who cares whether people understand you? Who cares whether you're treated fairly? Who cares if anybody understands you? Who cares if they mock you in public? You are here to get over your ego, not to defend it. Just as simple as that. I'm not here to defend it. Modern psychology, everything tells us, you have to stand up for your rights, you have to set your boundaries, you have a right to feel that way, you have to express yourself. Swami says you are here to get over your ego, not to defend it. Now you can't do that if inside you're afraid and lonely. And you really won't find comfort in the world. I mean, we do our best. We all do our best. But in the end, it's just between you and God. And who is that God? How much can you trust? How free can you really be in your love? Be ye therefore as little children, but children of wisdom, not children of naivete, children of power, who, like Master, commit ourselves freely, completely. What do we have to lose? I am the child of a great Master. I am the child of a great Mother. And her love is always with me. God bless you.